if you go on Twitch and LinkedIn, is that? Yeah, looks like it's live on LinkedIn. Hello everyone, welcome to our third webinar in our series. Today we'll be talking about incorporating historical data into financial models. We'll just wait around for a couple of minutes for a few more people to trickle in. Thank you for joining. If you're on LinkedIn, I think there should be a pretty obvious sort of commenting or live chat feature while you're watching the stream. And so if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, anything you want to see during the webinar, just put it in the live chat, and at the end we'll kind of go through and address some of those questions. Welcome if you're also watching us from Twitch. There's also a very obvious live chat on Twitch too, so feel free to post questions and comments in there, and we'd love to address them. I'll just wait around for a couple more minutes for some people to join, and then we will get cracking. Cool, so let's get started. In terms of an agenda for today's webinar, I'll just spend a couple of minutes introducing myself and then introducing Causal, our product. We'll then chat just for a few minutes more about why even bother incorporating historical data into financial models. Why might you do this? Why might you be interested in doing this? And then I'll share my screen and kind of walk through the process of what it looks like to connect historical data to financial models in Causal, and I'll kind of walk through all the different ways in which you might want to do that, and some of the interesting outputs that you can get once you work with historical data. So thanks again for everyone joining on LinkedIn and Twitch. I'm Taimur. I'm one of the founders and CEO of Causal. My background is mostly in mathematics. That's what I studied at university. Worked at a couple of startups as a data scientist mostly. And for the past 2 or 3 years, I have been running a company called Causal. Causal is an all-in-one tool for working with numbers. You can think of it as a little bit like a spreadsheet, but specifically for number crunching. And so you can use it for financial modeling, forecasting, scenario planning, all of that kind of stuff. The thing we'll be focusing on today is obviously financial modeling, and specifically how to incorporate historical data into financial models. Cool. So why bother incorporating historical data into financial models? Maybe you run a company, you have a financial model that produces some forecasts about how you see the future playing out for your company. Maybe trying out new product lines, that kind of stuff. Maybe planning headcount, planning your marketing spend, all of that kind of stuff that a company might be doing. Looks like there's some questions in a chat. Cool. I think on the technical side, everything should be okay. So shout in the chat if there's any technical issues. So you run a company, you have some financial models. Why might you want to incorporate historical data? I think there's kind of 3 main reasons. The first is kind of obvious. It's to actually just be able to see and visualize that historical data in one place. So you might have data coming in from your accounting system that would have all your financial metrics. You might have customer data coming in from a CRM that would have your pipeline and so on. You might have your own product usage data coming from an analytics tool or a data warehouse. So you have all these different sources of data, and it's actually quite useful just to be able to visualize those things in a single place. And so you want to be able to pull in the historical data into some kind of system. And so if you have a financial model, it's very useful to be able to see what were the sort of historical metrics that my financial model is tracking. So that's the first reason you might want to incorporate historical data, is to actually visualize that data and kind of see it up front. The second reason is to actually improve your forecasts. So your financial model will be based on a bunch of different assumptions that you've made around your business. Maybe on the marketing side of things, you've assumed a certain cost per acquisition. Maybe more on sort of the revenue side of things, you've assumed that a certain proportion of your users convert into paying customers. Maybe you've made assumptions around what the product breakdown is, how many customers use one product versus another. So you'll have made a bunch of different assumptions in your financial model. Some of them may be more accurate than others, but it's useful to be able to pull in historical data to actually use that data to sort of refine those assumptions. And so instead of just saying, hey, we spend $50 to acquire a new customer via Google, you can actually have historical data for how much you spent on Google Ads, how many customers came in through Google Ads, and in your financial model, you can kind of do that calculation to take the total amount spent on Google, divided by the number of customers that came through Google, and that can give you a much more accurate picture of your customer acquisition cost for Google, rather than just basing it on assumptions. So the second reason you might want to incorporate historical data into financial models is in order to improve the accuracy of your forecasts through clearer assumptions. And the final reason is to actually track the performance of your forecasts. You have a financial model that's producing forecasts going 6, 12, 24, maybe even further into the future in terms of months. You might be interested to see, okay, we've been predicting that we'll have this much revenue by the end of the year. How are we actually doing against that? How accurate have our predictions been historically? If you find that your predictions haven't been very accurate historically when you compare it to the data, then that might be a reason to revisit your assumptions, revisit your model, and try and understand, okay, why did we overestimate revenue last quarter, or why do we underestimate certain expenses last quarter? And so based on the historical data, you can kind of actually go adjust your model to improve its accuracy by tracking performance going forwards. So three kind of key reasons why you might want to pull data into your models. The first is to actually see that historical data in one place. The second is to improve the accuracy of your forecasts by driving your assumptions based on historical data. And then the third is to actually track the performance of your model, so you know how much confidence you can actually have in it, and so you know whether you need to make changes and make adjustments. So a lot of good reasons for incorporating historical data. How would you actually do that? So this is where a financial modeling tool like Causal could come in. So I'm going to share my screen and walk you guys through an example model that we've got set up in Causal, and then we'll see how to actually connect data up to the model. Cool, so you should now be able to see my screen. I've got here an example model set up in Causal. Just to kind of give a quick run through of the Causal platform, one of the main differences between Causal and spreadsheets is that once you've built your financial model, we automatically generate this kind of interactive dashboard view for you, and this is typically how you'd be viewing and presenting the model to other people. So you can decide who has access to this link. Anyone looking at this is looking at kind of a single source of truth for the whole model. All the numbers are live, and people can play around with different things. Maybe you want to see charts on a different time scale. You can do that in a couple of clicks. Obviously, in a spreadsheet, if you're using Excel or Google Sheets, you'd have to write formulas to add up the months into quarters and into years and so on. So we make that really easy. And then you can also expose different assumptions up here at the top that you want to let people play with. And so in this case, we have assumptions around how much are we spending on different types of expenses per employee, what's our income tax, what's our cost of goods sold, and so on. And so if someone is looking at this model and they're curious to see, hey, what happens if our cost of goods sold is a little bit higher, they can go in here and directly maybe change this to 25%, and everything updates in real time. And so you should see the charts just updated. And so this is a safe place for people to play around with the model, understand different scenarios without any chance of breaking anything and without having to go into the details of formulas and so on. So this is kind of the presentation view. In tables, we can kind of interact with them and sort of filter by different departments. And then we have kind of a big P&L table down here at the bottom. And this is what we'll be working with on the webinar today. And again, you can kind of switch between different departments. So this is how the model is set up. It's connected to a couple of other models. It's connected to a headcount model, which is pulling in call the headcount expenses, and it's connected to a revenue model as well, which is kind of modeling out the revenue side of things. But for today's webinar, we'll just be focusing on this P&L model. So I'm going to go behind the scenes by clicking this edit model button to show you how the model is set up. So this is where the model is set up. So it looks a bit like a spreadsheet. We have a bunch of different columns for the different months in the model and a bunch of different rows for what we call variables in Causal. And so, for example, if we take a look at the cost of goods sold row, we can click in any of these cells to see the formula. In this case, the formula for cost of goods sold is the current net revenue times the cost of goods sold percentage. So the formula is very readable. There's no cell references, anything like that. And a single formula is actually working out this cost of goods sold in all 24 months of our model. So a single formula is doing all of that work, so you have a lot less duplication than you might have in a spreadsheet. So we've kind of built out this model, a bunch of pretty easy to understand formulas for all the different items. What we want to do now is think about how to connect this to data. So suppose it's the start of the year. We've kind of put together this plan for for the next year. What we might want to do first is actually just save a version of this. Maybe this is our sort of budget for the year. We want to kind of lock in the current set of numbers in order to track against that. And so every month we want to see, hey, what was our budget predicting, and what was the actual number that came in. So every month we want to sort of track the performance of our model against the budget. And so in Causal we have a version control system that lets us do that. We can just click on this history button. And now we can save this as maybe budget 2021. So we've saved a version of our model. It's called budget 2021. These numbers are now all locked in. No matter what we do, we can always refer back to them. We can roll the whole model back, or we can just view this set of numbers. So we know that these numbers they're not lost in the ether. We're always going to have them. Now let's try and pull in some historical data. So suppose we have historical data for a bunch of these different expense line items. I'm just going to build some dummy data into Google Sheets to illustrate how this would work. So I can call this webinar data example. In here, I'll just sort of punch in just some dummy historical data for a bunch of these items. So we have advertising and promotion, and this is broken down by the different departments. So we have 5 different departments here. And so a bunch of these expenses are broken down per department. And so we can pull in that sort of department level detail. So we have these different departments for advertising and promotion. And then I guess we also have the suppliers. And again, we'll have it for a bunch of different departments. And maybe I'll just do a couple more. Maybe we'll do one of the revenue lines, so we can do net revenue. This isn't broken down by department, so that's fine. And then maybe we'll just do total expenses, since that's a nice big one. Once again, that is broken down by different departments. As you can see, my Google Sheets skills are not great. I'm using the mouse a lot, which is a big no-no if you're in spreadsheet circles. And suppose we have historical data from January all the way until, I guess we're in October now. So maybe we'll go up to September. Now we just need to fill in the data itself. And for now, I'll just use random numbers. So there's a handy function called rand in Google Sheets and Excel. And so maybe I'll just produce some random numbers in here in order to generate our historical data. Cool. So we have a bunch of historical data. I'll just remove the decimal points so it doesn't look quite so crazy. Maybe this is in dollars, and just to make things a little clearer, I might make all of this stuff in bold. So we have some historical data from January to September for all of these different items. Now what we want to do is go into our model in Causal and actually connect the model to this data. So I can create a new data source. A data source is how we connect data in Causal. And so I can create a Google Sheets data source. I'll just authenticate with Google Sheets in my account. And now I should see all the different data that I have, and I can just select my webinar data example, and I'll select sheet 1. So Causal is now showing us a preview of this data, so we can see all of these 4 different items that we had. We can see that these are broken down by the different departments. And we can just tell Causal that the department column in Google Sheets corresponds to the department sort of that we set up in Causal already. And so I can just tell Causal that we want to turn all of those different departments in Google Sheets into our departments in Causal. And so I've done that in a couple of clicks. Now that the data is connected, what I can do is go through each of these line items and connect them to the right thing from the data. So for advertising and promotion, I'm going to click on this data button and I can search for advertising and promotion. And there it is in the webinar data example sheet 1. We have advertising and promotion. And so I can click on that. And now you'll see a few things have changed. You'll see that the little Sparkline summary now has a solid section and it has a dashed section. So the line is solid where it's pulling in actuals or historicals, and it's dashed where we're doing the forecast. So you can see for maybe about a third of our whole model, we have historical data. You'll also see that there's a little data icon in a bunch of these cells. This is where Causal is automatically pulling in historical data. So we have historicals until September, and so you'll see a data icon in all of these cells until September. So Causal is automatically overriding these cells with historicals. And when we don't have historicals, so from October onwards, Causal will use the formula that we've already defined in order to do the forecast. And so this is our formula. Our formula counts the head count in each department and multiplies it by our assumption for the advertising and promotion cost per head. So we've connected advertising and promotion to data, and we have that broken down per department. I'll just go through and do the same for our other lines. And so for office supplies, I'll connect that to office supplies. I think for total expenses, connect that up as well. And for net revenue, finally, we can connect that up too. And so in a few clicks in the past sort of 2 minutes or so, I've kind of gone through and pulled in all of that historical data from Google Sheets into Causal. And anywhere you see a data icon, that is where you know historicals are being pulled in. And down here in this sort of preview section, I can kind of see the 4 different items that are being pulled in from Google Sheets. And they're all highlighted in blue, which just means that they're being used in my model. So if I had a bunch of items and I saw that some of them weren't highlighted, I would know that I haven't pulled in historical data in the model for those items yet. Cool. So we've now pulled in historical data, and we can now actually see that data in the spreadsheet cells. And if we go into the presentation mode, what we will see in our charts and tables is that until September, we have a bunch of values in blue in our table, and that means that it's coming in from historical data. And if values are in black, that means that's coming in by a calculation or a forecast that Causal is doing. So we've now accomplished the first thing that is useful about pulling in historical data, which is that you can actually just see and visualize that data in one place. So we can see a bunch of these expenses and our revenue and so on are in blue because they're coming from data. And you'll see in the chart as well, we're kind of seeing much smaller values for the actuals because they're just random numbers, and then our forecast is a sort of much bigger value. Cool. So we've managed to pull in data. We've managed to see the values. We might now be interested in tracking the performance of our forecasts. And so if I check out my charts and tables, right now we have a column for each month of our model, and we have a row for each of the different kind of items. So what we might want to do now is actually create a separate column for the budget version of the model which we saved, and a separate model for the actual data, and to be able to see the difference between the budget version and the actual data. In Causal, we can do that in a couple of clicks. Like I said earlier, we've saved that budget version already, so those numbers are not going to disappear. So we can select the table. We can go to the column section of the table. This is where we can define what the different items are in the columns, and we can add an item for different versions. And so now we'll see that we have multiple columns in the table, and now we can customize what columns to show. So maybe we don't care about our current forecast. Maybe we just care about seeing the budget version and the actuals. What we can do is go in here and we can say maybe the base version should be the budget, and maybe in addition to that, we want to show the actuals. And now we should see in our table in a couple of clicks, we now have the budget version in one column, we have the actuals in another column, and Causal is also showing the variances. So in here, it's showing the percentage difference between the budget and the actuals. And if we wanted, we could turn it off. So now if we go into our dashboard, anyone looking at this can see for each of these items what was the budget version. So, we budgeted for this much revenue, we actually have this much. We budgeted for, this much advertising spend, and we actually have this much. You can go in and easily see what was the budget, what are my actuals, and what is the difference. And we've done that in just a few clicks. And so every month we can kind of track our performance. Obviously, we would just use random numbers for the actual, so we wouldn't draw any actual conclusions here. But if you saw that you're consistently budgeting much higher revenue than is actually coming in, that might then prompt you to think, okay, what's going wrong that our budget is completely off? Why did we think we could generate all of that revenue? Why are we actually not being able to do that? And then you might have some discussions and figure out what the remedy is. But if you're not looking and tracking against your budget or against your forecasts, you might actually have months would go by, and it might actually be unclear to you that you're not performing as you'd planned, or that that something's not quite right. And so it's quite important to be able to track the performance of your model using actuals. So this is kind of how you'd work with historical data in Causal. Just to recap, what we've done is we've just created a Google Sheet with some dummy data. In reality, Causal would connect directly to your systems, whether that's accounting systems like Xero, QuickBooks, NetSuite, whether that's CRMs like Salesforce or HubSpot, or data warehouses, or BI tools like Looker. Causal can pull in that data. In a few clicks, you can then hook up the different rows in your model up to the right line items from the data. And then Causal will automatically pull in the actuals where they exist, and it'll automatically use your formula when the actuals don't exist. And just to show you one final thing, when it comes to the end of the month, so let's say September or rather October goes by, and then we have the actuals for October. Just add these into the model. The month goes by, we have some new historical data. How do we pull that into Causal? Well, all we need to do is go down here into this data tab, hit this refresh button to refresh the data source. And now we should see that automatically in the cells for October, we're now seeing this data icon for some of those items. And so Causal is now automatically pulling in data until October. And so the process at the end of each month of pulling in new data is just go here and hit a button. So it takes a few seconds. And once again, Causal will automatically do that comparison. So now in the month of October, we see the budget version, we see the actuals, and we see the difference. So there's no manual work involved in calculating these variances at the end of each month. And this kind of saves you a bunch of time that you could be spending on more strategic value-add work, like collaborating with others around the business. So at a high level, that's how Causal data integrations work, and that's how you can incorporate historical data into financial models. I'll just start sharing my screen now, and what we can do is just check out the live chats on LinkedIn and on Twitch to see if there are any questions that might be helpful to run through. So it looks like we have a bunch of comments around the quality of the stream. It looks like both Twitch and LinkedIn, the quality is not great. Apologies for that. We'll try and figure out what the issue was and make sure that the quality of future webinars is higher. It looks like there aren't too many questions, and so we'll wrap things up there. Thanks so much to everyone who joined. If you registered for the event on LinkedIn, then you should get an email after the event in the next day or so with a link to a recording of the webinar in case you missed anything. And we'll have future webinars, roughly 1 or 2 every month over the next few months. And so do follow Causal on LinkedIn and keep a lookout for those webinars. And hopefully we'll see you guys next time. Thanks so much for joining. Bye.